Hello, and welcome back to the Wandering Cantos. Today, we're going to be doing another episode of the Poetics of, where we take a look at the different poetic techniques and devices being used by different pieces of media which are not explicitly being presented as poems. Today, we're going to be taking a look at I'll Still Be Here by Gigi Murin and Lorien. I hope I'm pronouncing Lorien correctly. So, yeah, I was initially a bit cautious to do this one just because I know this is a deeply personal song, but, I'm going to be respectful throughout the whole course of this. And beyond that, I did try to avoid looking at too much of the sort of conversation around this one online just because I like to go into these sort of as blind as possible. And again, I just want to give a quick disclaimer because this is sort of a personal song. Here with this series, we very much celebrate the concept of the death of the author, which basically means once something's published, it goes out to the audience, and it's the audience's now. So everyone's going to have a different interpretation of something based on their own world experiences, what other pieces of media they've consumed, etc. So I by no means am claiming that I have like the definitive understanding of the meaning of this, but this is just sort of my interpretation of it and sort of also my celebration of, like I said, the different poetic techniques. So all of that being said, I think we should just get the chalkboard up and jump right into it. All right, so we're going to start right here with the opening, which is also the chorus. So we have, watch how the clouds move on before the skies are clear. Hope to find my strength before they disappear. Oh, if I fell again, would your shadow still be right behind me? Every sunrise passes. I. So, right from the get-go, we can see that there's some rhyming going on where we have clear and disappear. But there's not a rhyme here with me, passes, I, like no real rhyme going on there. So we don't have like a consistent locked-in rhyme scheme. But we have a bunch of really cool imagery already from the get-go. So watch how the clouds move on before the skies are clear. Hope to find my strength before they disappear. So this is really interesting from the get-go because based on the tenses, we can see that they're currently watching the clouds move on before they're clear. So the skies are not clear yet. Otherwise, it would be I watched how the clouds move on before the skies are clear. So right from the get-go, we're getting an introduction where we're seeing our sort of narrator, our sort of protagonist, being in a situation in which the skies are actually not clear. They're covered with a heavy overcast, and they understand, though, that the skies will eventually be clear. So this isn't someone who thinks it's always going to be this way. But something that's interesting is normally with the sort of context of grief or any sort of sorrow, when we use the image of clouds, it's an oppressive sort of weight or blanket over the skies, which sort of reflects the heaviness of a sort of depressive state. And normally then when the clouds move on and the skies become clear, that's normally like a happy thing because the sun will be out, etc. However, here they're saying that they hope to find their strength before the clouds disappear. So there's this sense of right now they don't have their strength, so they're in a sort of weakened state for some reason that we don't fully know yet at this point in the piece. But they're actually anxious about when the skies will become clear because they feel like they're going to need strength for that time after this point. They don't need to find their strength now. They need it before the clouds disappear and the sky becomes clear. So it's a very interesting sort of setup. It makes you wonder, like, why do they need the strength once the sun comes out again and, apparently everything should be good again. And now we have a different sort of image, which says, if I fell again, would your shadow still be right behind me? So the again reveals a lot in that this is something that has happened before. So we can understand that the you're here is someone who is sort of, loyal and reliable, in which the protagonist has fallen before, but then has been helped up by someone whose shadow is right behind them. It is sort of interesting, though, and sort of beautiful when you kind of take it from the whole piece as a whole, that it's not saying if I fell again, would you be right behind me? Instead, it's would your shadow still be right behind me? I feel like there's a lot there, because it kind of immediately fills a bunch. A shadow can sort of be slightly of a ghostly image, or sort of like it's the imprint of someone. We can sometimes talk about the memory of someone being like a shadow rather than they are actually there. But also, if you picture, someone has fallen, so this is, they're on the ground, and if they're able to see the shadow, let's get a different color chalk here. If they're able to see the shadow of someone, that implies that the other person is, taller, higher up than them, which could be associated. I know that this was dedicated to her father, so you can read into that imagery as a taller father figure standing up, and then he's there to help, and she can see his shadow even when she's fallen down. So I think that's really beautiful. What's interesting is that every sunrise passes. So again, I haven't looked at the whole song. The whole purpose of this is to sort of show what we do with poetry when we're engaging with it, and we're sort of annotating it in the marginalia and doing pretty much what you can see on screen right now. And part of it is you're sort of parsing together the different meanings and explanations and images so that you can get, the fuller picture. Because often with poetry, and as we see with songwriting like this, there's a good degree of meaning between the lines. And so here, not everything is being said explicitly, because there's no real artistry to that if it was just to say, I'm sad because X, Y, and Z or something. Instead, they're using imagery of nature, which we see a lot in the romantic movement, and different symbols and sort of, again, like metaphors and similes and images that we're commonly familiar with, such as oh, don't worry, the clouds will eventually pass on and then the sun will shine again. Every sunrise passes. I'm not sure at this point in the piece if that's to imply that every sunrise passes is a good thing, where it's like you can get through the sunrise, because eventually, they got to find their strength before the skies are clear. So is it something like, don't worry, just kind of hunker down, eventually the sunrise will pass? And then I don't know, they can maybe address their emotional status better? Or is it saying every sunrise passes in that everything ultimately comes to pass, this too shall pass, that kind of thing? Or as a third option, is it sort of a time is passing on sort of without them, because they're still stuck in a moment, and so the sunrises keep passing, but they aren't quite caught up with that sort of cyclical beating on of time. And then it ends with I, which feels like there should be almost like an ellipses there, where it's sort of they have something they want to say, but they can't quite get it out yet. So now we have our first real verse and our next sort of passage. So here, there's a lot of interesting information that is revealed through word choice. So wonder is used over and over and over again. And what's interesting about that is it indicates sort of a constant, uncertain sense of thinking about something. Because if you're wondering about something, you don't have all the info. It's something you don't have the answer to yet. So, it's, and again, also with that is the tense that is used. So we have, instead of it being wondered, where it's big, oh, if I wondered how it'd be, I wondered what would change, but now I know. Instead, this, narrator protagonist is revealing that they're still in a state of, they wonder how it would be. They wonder what would change if you were still here with me. So they don't have any sort of resolution. So we could say they don't have that. And again, which is interesting, is as it lines up with the chorus, we also have this sort of theme of questioning of strength and if someone is strong enough. And again, it seems to have to do with like an emotional strength. But it's also interesting that the psychology of the protagonist is sort of revealed through these sort of little obsessions. In poetry, we see that a lot. We see that a lot in, like, for example, Shakespeare, Hamlet, is constantly bringing up the same points over and over again, and that is revealing that it's something that matters a lot to him, and it's something he's sort of obsessively thinking about. So here we have this sort of whether I was strong and, I need to get the strength. And so we see that the protagonist / the narrator of this is someone who believes that they have to be strong. Which sort of adds an extra level of kind of tragedy to this, in that this piece is, as we see here in the title, they're still here and they're wondering what it would be like if this other person was still there with them. As we see in the chorus, they discuss basically, if I fall, will your shadow still be there? So the person they have lost was a support system. And so now, without that support system, they have to be strong, because normally, if someone is going through a hardship, we say like, oh, well, you don't have to carry this burden alone. You don't have to be strong. Don't be afraid to rely on others. Don't be afraid to lean on others. But here, the narrator seems to not have anyone else to lean on, because the one person who would be there when they fell, etc., is now gone. And so they now sort of have the burden of having the strength to deal with this, because they're effectively dealing with it alone. So, which is, really beautifully tragic in a way. And I also want to celebrate the writing in this, that again, like, by showing this sort of same image / idea over and over again, we get that sort of reveal without them ever explicitly having to say that. And that's where the poetry really comes in, where you get that sort of hidden meaning, or again, like, implied meaning. And when you really sit with a piece, you start to understand more and more about the piece and the sort of speaker / narrator of the piece. And so now they say, and although time moves on, I try to keep you in my memory, picture every moment, I know you'd be proud of me. Here, again, word choice is so essential, because I've said this in the Poetics of episodes, but, if you're writing a novel and it's 1,000-page long novel, there's a certain degree of flexibility with language where not every single word has to be the most precise. If you can get it to that point, you're going to be writing a really strong novel, but there's a bit of breathing room, let's say. But with poetry or with songwriting, where you only have, a very limited amount of space to write within, you have to, be so careful with every word choice. And so here, the fact that they include I try to is actually revealing, because they technically could have said, and although time moves on, I keep you in my memory. If they had done it where it was just I keep you in my memory, it's a very confident and ironically strong sense of confidence, where it's like, I'm able to do this, I'm able to do it successfully, I'm not having any struggles with this. But instead, they're saying, I try to keep you in my memory, which also goes back to trying to keep someone in your memory is actually a very emotionally taxing thing, because it sort of requires you to constantly be thinking about this person, and when you think about the person, you think about the loss of that person. And so with this whole imagery of, trying to be strong, we also see that they're trying to keep them in their memory. And, sort of going back to revealing, because the whole thing is, seems to be that the understanding is that this piece may be about the loss of a parental figure. But if you went into this not knowing that, the writing itself reveals that without it ever explicitly saying it. Because as we saw with the image of someone falling over and seeing the shadow would have to be long enough, which means the person would have to be tall enough, which you could then infer that that person might be older, and we're dealing with like a child in a parental image. And then also typically when you're talking about the loss of someone and hoping that they're proud of them, we usually think of that as being a sentiment that is shared with about parental figures and their kids and stuff like that. So let's jump into the next passage. All right, and so here we get the chorus again. However, some of the words have changed. So we have, watch how the clouds move on before the skies are clear. Watch how the clouds move on before the skies are clear. Hope to find my strength before they disappear, oh. Hope to find my strength before they disappear, oh. If I fell again, would your shadow still be right behind me? If I fell again, would your shadow still be right behind me? Every sunrise passes, every sunrise passes, I feel you here. So the new inclusion of what was perhaps something the narrator couldn't get out earlier, and again we had that sort of ellipses, we now see that what they were trying to say is that they still feel you here. And that's an interesting development within the piece itself, because we're seeing it's starting off with the skies aren't clear, they're hoping they find their strength, they're worried about what would happen if they fell, and there's this uncertainty here of, would your shadow still be right behind me? Would your shadow still be here right behind me? That's sort of, it's uncertain, instead of, if I fell again, I know that your shadow would be right there, kind of thing. But here we get sort of a development that they feel that this other person is there. They can feel their presence. So they're potentially getting a bit more sort of confident in knowing that they aren't alone, actually, even though they originally were afraid of that, and that they can still feel the presence of this other person. So we'll have to keep a close eye out for the next time the chorus comes up to see if there's any other changes. But until then, let's jump into the next verse. So here in the second verse, I'm kind of curious. I don't know if this is just a case of similar language being used, or if we might potentially have an illusion with the I still go through 1,000 miles part. Because 1,000 miles, there's a pretty famous song where someone describes 1,000 miles, and they would walk 1,000 miles if they could just see you. And it's a song about missing someone a lot. And so thematically, these two songs are actually very similar to one another. So I do wonder if this is an illusion, or I guess if it's intentional or unintentional, because this is sort of a good moment to sort of talk about the whole death of the author concept that we were talking about. So basically, following this sort of philosophy of once the audience has it, it's theirs, since I can make a strong enough argument that the 1,000 Mile Song has enough in common thematically to this song, I can argue that this is an illusion, and I don't really need to check with Gigi Murin and Lorian to see if that's true. I'm able to just confidently make my case that. So if you were in an English class in college and you were writing a essay on this piece, part of your essay could be an argument about how these two songs converse with one another, and you could then compare them, contrast them, talk about differences, thematic differences, etc. So sort of a little moment just to sort of highlight once again this sort of craft of doing the quote unquote the poetics of. But to get back into our little analysis, I think that the use of this 1,000 miles with the ups and downs I did with you is a really good pairing, because 1,000 miles makes you think of obviously like a long trip, and whether, I don't know, because it's so long, I almost think of it as like a road trip of a car trip. And then you think of the ups and downs. So you have your 1,000 miles here, and then you do ups and downs. And it almost creates sort of the image of, going on a long journey and sort of a traversal. And so here you have also the emotional highs and the emotional lows. So it's sort of a nice way of saying also, like, I think of the good times and the bad times, but to put it a bit more beautifully, to say the ups and the downs instead, because bad times can have such a negative connotation to it that it doesn't quite fit with the, it might not quite fit with what you're meaning, because someone might initially think that the bad times could be a fight, but it could just be hardships that they went through together, emotional lows that they went through together. It doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad time where they were against each other or something like that. And I write down 1,000,000 lines of things that I could say to you, and it's so hard sometimes to just come out and say the words, but I miss you, so please don't miss a single thing that I do. And here is really beautiful, is we kind of finally get the speaker saying explicitly what they want. We saw in the other one where they said, I hope you're proud of me. They want to feel, as we see in the chorus, the second chorus where they say, I feel you here. They want to feel like this person is still watching them as they go through their journey. And, just like with the shadow thing, they want to feel that there's this presence behind them, so that if they fall and they're on the ground, there's someone who's watching them, looking over them, proud of them, observing them, seeing what they're doing. And so they miss them, and they don't want them to miss that. But it also is sad because there is the implication that there's a fear that they are missing what they do, because these two people used to do things together, but now, for reasons the poem doesn't state explicitly, this other person's no longer there. And so, because through their use of language, there's almost a pleading. I'm pleading with you to please don't miss a thing that I do, which implies that they still have anxiety that that person may be missing these things, rather than confidently saying, I know you don't miss a single thing I do. It's saying, please don't miss it. Like, if you can, please, keep watching me, keep observing what I'm doing. So, which also has to do with the fact that, which is a big part of this, is that there sort of is a breakdown in communication. They're writing down 1,000,000 things that they want to say to this person, but they can't. It's that they could say to you. And the most important thing they want to say is don't miss a single thing that I do. But they also can't hear back the person. Sometimes it's hard to come out and say the words, and they're struggling to say it, and they're struggling to feel heard with it. And they also can't hear the other side, because there's a very good chance that the other side would be saying, don't worry, I am watching, and I am seeing everything you're doing, and I'm proud of you. But even if they're trying to say I'm proud of you, the speaker can't hear that because of that sort of communication breakdown. So it's a very beautiful sort of like theme that they're working towards about this sort of wall between these two people, and the implications of how they're both trying to deal with it. So here we have the third and final iteration of the chorus. So I have first one, second one, and then the third one. And as we saw with the first and the second, the main difference was the addition of I feel you here. However, the third one is actually quite different, so I want to take some time just sort of discussing those differences. So right from the get-go, instead of watch how the clouds move on, because here we still have watch how the clouds move on before the skies are clear, we have let's. Let's is obviously let us. Us implies at least two people. It could be up to two, at least two. So there's now this sense of they are together. I feel you here, so now let's watch the clouds move on before the skies are clear. Know to find my strength before they disappear. No longer is it hope, it's now no. There's this confidence, there's this assertiveness that, or I guess the best way to say it is there's that strength that we've been looking for this whole piece. They now have that strength. They know that they will find that strength before they disappear. There's not the hope. I think they've already found it personally by the change in sort of attitude here. And then if I fell again, would your shadow still be right here behind me? Then there's could your shadow still be right behind me? So what's interesting about the would and could is it almost feels more like a request. If I'm holding a pen and you want that pen, you wouldn't say, would you hand me that pen? You would say, could you hand me that pen? So there's a sense of that communication channel may be opened up now because of the difference in how much change one letter can do, because now it feels more conversational. Let's watch the clouds. Oh, and could your shadow still be right behind me? Every sunrise passes, I will still be here. So it's interesting here as this ending still has a bit of melancholy to it, a bit in my opinion, is that they will still be here, but they feel that the other person's there, but it's not will, it still can't be will still be here. You just, because of the nature of the reality of what has happened, there's a loss. You can't really end it by saying we'll still be here because things are still different. And there is still a loss. But despite the loss, they'll still be here. They can still feel that the other person is there. And so together they feel as though they can stand together and watch the clouds move on before the skies are clear. So with that, I kind of think I want to wrap up this little episode of the Poetics of. I really, really like this song, and, I like the poem that lies within the lyrics. One of my favorite things with these songs, and I've been noticing it more and more, which is cool because I didn't really notice it before when I was sort of, I guess, more passively listening to it, is the sort of shift that we see in the choruses. Because it really makes it more of like a story. There's a beginning, a middle, and end, and we can see character growth throughout the process of the song, rather than if it was just the same chorus every time. The chorus almost loses some value by being repeated. It just feels like they're just repeating it just to break up the space between verses. But when there's that change, it's not just sort of a placeholder between verses, but it's revealing character growth, and character growth via our journey through the verses, because it's in the verses that we get the character, the speaker, basically starting to take action. They say what they want to say, they get it off their chest, they express what they're feeling, and then they go back to the verse, which is the repetition, but the status quo changes, and their emotional state changes, even if things feel sort of similar. So I really enjoyed this, and I hope you guys enjoyed this too. I always have a lot of fun getting out the chalkboard and doing these little sort of deep dives. So if you enjoyed this and you want to be notified when there's more, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe. And I'd also love it if you could leave a comment telling me what your thoughts are on this song. Did you have a totally different understanding of some of these different word choices, etc.? Did you get a totally different theme out of it than me? I really love having conversations about these songs. And so, I always read all of them and comment, reply to all of them. So I'd really love that. But with that being said, I'm going to wrap this one up. So I will see you in the next one.